Hi, I'm Karan Thapar. Over the last few years, I hope you've been watching my program, The Interview on the Wire. During that period, I've interviewed doctors, politicians, businessmen, scientists, authors, and even the occasional Nobel laureate. For me, it's been exciting. I hope it's been enjoyable for you. But these, as you know, are tough times, and if this program is going to remain bold, independent, and sometimes even defiant, then I think we need your support. At the end of the day, it's a truism, but editorial independence is best defended by the viewers. So if you would like this program to remain the way it is, forthright, outspoken, and interesting, then would you consider supporting us? All you have to do is to click on the description at the bottom. But more than anything else, I hope you will continue to watch the interview. Your viewership means an awful lot to me. Hello and welcome to a special interview for The Wire. Tomorrow, the 31st of January, sees the launch of the third and latest edition of Ramachandra Guha's epic history of modern India. And here it is. It's called India After Gandhi, A History. And let me tell you, this particular edition has a whole new chapter on Narendra Modi and an epilogue as well. And that raises the critical question, what does Ram Guha think of Narendra Modi's almost 9 years as Prime Minister, and what is his assessment of Narendra Modi? Those are the two key issues I shall explore today with Ram Guha himself. And let me add, this is Mr. Guha's first and so far only interview on the latest edition of his book. Ram Guha, as I said in that introduction, tomorrow is the official launch of your highly regarded book, India After Gandhi, A History, in its third edition. And this has a whole new chapter on Narendra Modi and an epilogue on the same subject as well. That's what I want to focus on in this interview, and I'll take up the story with Narendra Modi's re-election in 2019. You write, and I'm quoting you, from the results of the 2019 general elections, one could draw two broad conclusions. The first is the BJP is today India's sole national party. It is to national politics now what the Congress once was. So has the BJP become a colossus on the Indian political stage? And in comparison, are all the other parties Lilliputian?
So it clearly is dominant over large parts of northern and western India, and in addition, significantly, the northeast. So in the south and some states in the east, it's not, certainly doesn't win state elections. But insofar as the north is the most populous part of India, it sends the most people to parliament, it has a definitive role in Indian politics. And that's why the BJP is powerful, and that's why Narendra Modi is extremely popular. So it is, you could say it has, to use a phrase used by Ranjit Guha, a historian of mine, it has dominance without hegemony. So it's dominant but not totally in control.
But do we have a situation similar to the one that we had in the 50s and 60s,
Yes.
when everyone believed Congress was likely to win every national election? Now, has that become true of the BJP?
Well, it has so far. And I mean, we have about a year and 2 months to go for, 3 months to go for the next general election. And they certainly are in pole position. Of course, there's opposition in the states. And there's opposition by social activists. In my book, I describe the farmers' movement, I describe the anti-CAA protests. So in that sense, we aren't completely, public life, civil society is not dominated by the BJP and Modi. But insofar as it is a dominant party, very akin to what the Congress was like in the 50s and the 60s. So in the second edition of the book, which was published in 2017, I coined the phrase the BJP system. Rajni Kothari talked famously of the Congress system, and now we have the BJP system. Of course, the question is things can change. I mean, one can't predict too far in the future. There could be economic downturn, there could be changes in leadership. But at the moment, certainly, and particularly in the populous and electorally dominant states of northern and western India, the BJP under Narendra Modi is solid.
The new Congress?
Yes, the new Congress.
Now
of course, with a twist with regard to ideology, but we'll come to that later.
You write, and I'm quoting again, the second conclusion that flowed from the 2019 general elections is that India is becoming ever more of a Hindu country. The most distinctive feature of the Modi government has been its steady reshaping of politics and political discourse in a Hindu idiom. And then you add, Modi's majoritarianism is unapologetic. So are we hearing the death knell of Indian secularism, and is it as good as dead?
So, Karan, we are speaking on 30th January 2023, the 75th anniversary of the martyrdom of Mahatma Gandhi. And we know why Gandhi was murdered. Gandhi was murdered because he lived and died and fasted and struggled for equal rights for Indians of all religious denominations. Now, I took the precaution of checking the tweets by Modi and Amit Shah this morning on Gandhi's 75th death anniversary, and they talked about Swachhata, cleanliness, Swadeshi, but nothing about religious harmony, because that doesn't matter to them. They are unapologetically majoritarian. They'll instrumentally use Gandhi for things that are inconsequential. But when it comes to the most important aspect, not just of Gandhi's life and message, but also of the constitutional promise to our minorities. Our constitution came into effect 2 years after Gandhi died. And those who oversaw it, people like Nehru and Ambedkar, were equally committed to that. And that is the reshaping of Indian politics, public discourse, the law, in a kind of unapologetically majoritarian idiom, is a dramatic and, to my mind, deeply worrying shift.
So are we hearing the death knell of Indian secularism?
Again, I don't want to predict, but
certainly... No, not predict. Are we hearing it now as we sit here today?
The situation is extremely dire. We are, as I argue again in the epilogue to my book, we are approximating the South Asian norm. So, Myanmar and Sri Lanka were Buddhist were Buddhist majoritarian states. Pakistan and Bangladesh are Islamic republics, defined their politics and statecraft defined on the basis of religion. India stood proudly apart for 75 years.
No longer.
And now we are coming closer and closer to that South Asian norm.
In which case, let me ask you, what does this mean for Indian Muslims? They are 15% of our population, 200 million people, and that's not just a huge number.
Yes.
It's probably greater than the population of most countries in the world. And yet, this is what you write about the situation they face. The aggressive majoritarianism of the Modi years has now led to a deep anxiety among members of India's largest and increasingly beleaguered religious minority. Are our Muslim brothers and sisters becoming second-class citizens in their own country?
It appears so. And not just in rhetoric, not just in politics. Remember, the BJP has 300-odd MPs in the Lok Sabha, not a single Muslim. No longer even in the Rajya Sabha, now that Mukhtar Abbas Naqvi's term has ended. If you look at law, the CAA is blatantly unconstitutional. It discriminates against Muslims. If you look at the Prime Minister inaugurating all these temples, 2 days ago, the Chief Minister of Uttar Pradesh said Hinduism is our national religion. I don't know from what kind of constitutional playbook he arrived at that definition. And so they are, and talking to ordinary Muslims, they are fearful. They are not angry and militant because they may be scared of the repercussions, but they are unsure, insecure, and don't really feel wanted. And I think that should deeply worry Hindus in particular. I think Hindus should know from the examples of countries around the world what happens with majoritarianism. Look at what happened to the Tamils in Sri Lanka because of Sinhala majoritarianism. Look at what Pakistan did to its minorities. Do we want to go down that path? Hindus should ask themselves that question.
Would you say that the mistreatment, and the word mistreatment I dare say is a euphemism, but the mistreatment of Muslims is not just the biggest change that's happened under Modi, but the most worrying?
Yeah, so and again, it's not just Modi. It's Modi, it's Shah, it's Adityanath.
Under the BJP
regime. It's the other ministers, it's the RSS, it's the VHP, it's the Bajrang Dal. Yes. And mistreatment and stigmatization. They're made to feel inferior. They're made to feel as they have no moral, legal, historic, cultural stake in this country. Why was Mughal Gardens renamed 2 days ago? Only because of the name Mughal. That's all. So
completely forgetting, by the way, that it is actually patterned on a Mughal design.
Of course.
So is this stigmatization, to use your phrase, the biggest and also the most worrying change under Modi?
Yes, I think absolutely, particularly since 2019, where it has accelerated. I think the coming in of Amit Shah as Home Minister has a lot to do with that, into the cabinet.
Let's come then at this point to how you evaluate and assess Modi's governance. To begin with, on the economy, you cite the opinion of T.N. Nainan, the former editor-in-chief and publisher of the Business Standard, and his words are, the economic front may be the Modi government's primary failure. Is that your assessment as well?
Well, my book is largely about society and politics. It's secondarily about economics. But experts who are sober, wise, impartial, non-partisan, like T.N. Nainan and also the former chief economic advisor Arvind Subramanian, who I cite, and also Shankaracharya, another person I cite. These are all serious scholars who are not ideologues, who look at the data. So if you look at things like crony capitalism, declining female workforce participation, rising unemployment, if you look at the long impact of demonetization on trust in the economy. So I think our economic story, which we have boasted about a lot, I think the aggregate data conceal a lot of sins, such as this kind, distribution, the fact that, the growth such as it is in some states, usually in the south and the west. So, but I think we have underperformed on the economic front. But on the social and political front, what is even more worrisome is that we are redefining what it means to be Indian. That's, to my mind, a much greater worry.
So you incline to the view, without being an economist, that on the economic front we have his primary failure.
We have?
His primary failure.
I
Those were nine.
I would say. In my view, his primary, I wouldn't say failure, his greatest victory, the BJP's greatest victory is redefining political discourse in Hindu terms, and it's also the greatest moral and social failure from the point of view of the constitutional promise of the Indian Republic.
So what he's done to Indian Muslims is of much greater import than his inability or his lack of success in handling the economy.
I don't want to prioritize or hierarchize. I don't believe that is a single, but as a social and political historian, that's my primary focus. Economic historians may judge him differently.
Let me put to you what many people often talk about as one of Mr. Modi's successes on the economic front. Those are the welfare measures that he's implemented. I'm talking of things like bank accounts, LPG cylinders, toilets, houses, health insurance. The sociologist Dipankar Gupta says that the real importance of these welfare measures is that they've given to the poor a sense of dignity and self-respect. To what extent do you agree or do you disagree with Dipankar Gupta?
So I think we should use words very carefully. Dignity and self-respect imply that you're in command of your life. What you have here is consolation and succor, not dignity and self-respect. I think we should use our words very carefully. If you go back to medieval times, when we had Rajas and Nawabs, when the crops failed, the king or the Nawab announced a tax remission. That's similar to putting a few hundred rupees or giving you ration in your account. It's consolation. It is not dignity and self-respect. I'm surprised that a senior sociologist like Professor Gupta would use these terms. Dignity and self-respect in a democracy would be that your child has access to the same schools as Ram Guha's child and Karan Thapa's child, access to the same hospitals, opportunities for employment, for growth, absolute self-respect. I mean, do Muslims have self-respect? Do women have self-respect? So I think let's use our terms very carefully.
Succor and consolation.
These welfare measures provide succor and consolation, which is quite different from dignity and self-respect.
On the foreign policy front, many people say that Modi's biggest problem today, and it has been for the last 2 years, is China.
Yeah.
In your book, you cite his extravagant praise
Yeah.
of Xi Jinping at Wuhan in April 2018, and you call it a lyrical ode to the unbreakable bond between the two countries. Just over a year later, when the two met again, Xi and Modi, in Mamallapuram, you cite from Modi's own website where the meeting was said to have added great momentum to India-China relations. And yet, roughly 7-8 months after Mamallapuram, the Chinese reneged on all their border commitments with India. Yeah. They trespassed on Indian territory, and arguably, it's reported that they're still on Indian territory, although our government denies it. Would you say that Modi completely misread Xi, and in a sense, that misreading is his biggest foreign policy failure?
So it's certainly a foreign policy failure, and ironically, Modi acted out of a spirit of Nehruvian naivety. I mean, Nehru is a hate figure for the Hindu right. But in this respect, Nehru thought befriending China, going to Beijing, getting chow and line here. Friendship, personal friendship, would be the route to stable international relations. And Modi seems to have made the same mistake. I mean, he boasted about how allegedly, and of course, this is in the realm of myth, as many of the claims of the Prime Minister and his ministers tend to be, that his native village and she's native village had some mystical bond from the 12th or 15th century onwards. So he clearly trusted too much in what he called his personal chemistry. मेरे और उनके बीच personal chemistry है, So, and without really going into the realm of real politics. So, in a sense, this was a repeat of the mistakes made by Nehru in the 1950s.
It's a very interesting comparison, anyway, because the truth about Nehru is not only did Nehru misread the Chinese, but he falsely believed in things that he thought Zhou Enlai believed in, which clearly Zhou Enlai didn't believe in.
Exactly.
Has Modi made the same mistake about Xi Jinping, misread him and believed things about him that simply aren't true?
It certainly appears so.
Now, beyond the economy and beyond foreign policy, there is this whole issue of the Modi government and perhaps Narendra Modi himself specifically, attitude to India's constitution and democratic institutions. You're right, Modi has subverted and undermined public institutions far more systematically than Nehru ever did. And no one would deny that, for instance, institutions like the Election Commission, the Reserve Bank of India, the Controller and Auditor General, the CBI, the ED, and even the functioning of Parliament have all seriously suffered under Narendra Modi over the last 9.5 years. But the question is, who shares more of the blame, Modi or the men and women who man these institutions and fail to stand up for them?
Well, I think both. But one must remember that Indian public servants do not have a good record of showing a stiff spine. When the emergency was declared, Fali Nariman honorably resigned the same day as Additional Solicitor General. Bagaram Tulpule, who was, I think, General Manager of the Durgapur Steel Plant, resigned. But most people stayed in their post. So, Indian public servants have not shown moral courage. They have not really pushed back. And that's been used. Their weaknesses have been used by Narendra Modi to further undermine these institutions. And I say in that epilogue, I describe him as Indira Gandhi on steroids. All right. No, I think that's what he really is. I mean, Indira Gandhi attacked, weakened, undermined institutions, put loyalists in preference to people of real competence and credibility.
And Modi is doing the same thing.
Even further.
And Modi is doing the same thing.
Even further.
Even further.
Indira Gandhi on steroids.
One of the most telling parts of the new chapter in your book is your criticism of the Supreme Court. You believe that its functioning under Modi over the last 9.5 years is particularly not just disappointing, damning. You cite an unnamed constitutional scholar who speaks of, and I'm quoting, the complete capitulation of the Supreme Court to the majoritarian rule of Prime Minister Narendra Modi. During the Modi period, not only has the court failed to perform its constitutional role as a check on government excesses, it has acted as a cheerleader for the Modi government's agenda. But given that Supreme Court judges are protected, and they can only be removed by impeachment, isn't this as much an indictment of them as it is of the government that's put pressure on them?
Very much so. By the way, the constitutional scholar is named in the footnotes. I didn't want to name the text, but you can see who the person is, and his credibility is unquestioned. So absolutely, I think not hearing the Kashmir issue, not hearing CAA, blatant flattery by sitting Supreme Court judges, who are then rewarded with post-retirement posts. So they've shown a certain spinelessness. I think I also quote Justice AP Shah on the pusillanimity of the Supreme Court. Now, maybe it will show some more spine. I think some Supreme Court judges are worried about the international image of the court, which has taken a huge beating in the last 6 or 7 years. But the Supreme Court, maybe less so than the Election Commission and the CBI and the ED, but the Supreme Court has also let down the Indian Constitution.
It's very interesting you should mention Justice AP Shah, because not so long ago, he wrote an article for The Hindu and then he spoke about it at great length in an interview to me. And he pointed out that historically, when India's had strong dominant leaders, the court has become pusillanimous.
Right.
When we have weak political governments, the court becomes strong. And the interesting thing is that in Indira Gandhi's day, particularly during the emergency, the Supreme Court weakened.
Yeah. Well, I'll just add something to that. He's right about that. So it's not weak and strong. It is large majorities and coalition governments. In a large, complex, diverse country, coalitions function much better. So if you look at the coalition governments of Narasimha Rao, Vajpayee and Manmohan Singh, that's when we had our best economic growth. That's also when we had our most deepest federalism, because you had to take the interests of all the states into account. Under Indira Gandhi, the reckless use of Article 356 was so common to undermine states' rights. Under Narendra Modi, the way in which you have activist governors like Ravi in Tamil Nadu and Kosiari in Maharashtra and Dhankar before this in Bengal to again undermine state governments. So in all respects, institutional autonomy, economic growth, federalism, the lesson for Indians is don't give anyone 300 or 400 seats. That's bad news for us.
But the particularly disturbing, if that is the right word, thing for us is that the one institution that you think will always stand up, because that is its job to stand up for the constitution, is the institution that also buckles when you have a strong dominant government at the center.
And Justice Shah is right. If you look at the history of the Supreme Court, it's the 80s and 90s that it recovered its soul and its spirit, partly because of the justified criticism it got because of its weakness during the emergency. And perhaps a similar kind of corrective may take place now. As I said, there's a lot of adverse international commentary by the finest judicial minds across the world about the way the Supreme Court has behaved in the last 7 or 8 years. And hopefully some of our sitting judges, including the Chief Justice, are reading it. And if not for our interests, at least for their posthumous reputation, will do something to correct it.
Let me see if I can draw a hesitant conclusion, both about the judiciary and the institutions that have failed to stand up and have allowed Mr. Modi and the Modi government to pressurize them. In both cases, would you say that Narendra Modi sensed weaknesses of character in individuals, weaknesses of process and functioning,
Yes,
and used them and exploited them to his benefit? In other words, he saw an opportunity and grabbed it.
see, I would not personalize it too much. I think, in my view, this is one difference between Modi's first term and second term. In the second term, the Home Minister is as important. I think a lot of the manipulation of institutions, a lot of the malafide instructions being given to them come from the Home Minister and not from the Prime Minister.
Does this make the second term worse? Because now there are two dominant individuals.
Absolutely, it does. It does. I think people have not recognized this. That if you look at, and of course, the Home Minister is consistently polarizing the electorate on communal lines. The Prime Minister may not do this, but the Home Minister is doing it all the time. So I think there's a kind of you're right about Narendra Modi from his days in Gujarat, wanting loyal, pliant bureaucrats. I mean, there's no accident that there's so many Gujarat cadre officers in positions of importance and influence, recognizing people are weak, how they can be sweetened by post-retirement jobs, how threats and intimidation work against them. So I think all this is a model used over 12 years in Gujarat, now being applied. But I would, again, all the cabinet ministers are silent. I mean, it's just as you say, just as civil servants, people who man regulatory bodies and Supreme Court justices should be more proactive, so should be the other cabinet ministers.
But inherent in your answer is now two explanations why the second Modi term starting 2019 is considerably more disturbing than the first term which started in 2014. The first thing that we already have discussed is that the stigmatization of Muslims got much worse after 2019.
Absolutely.
But the second thing now is we have the combination,
Yes.
not of Modi alone, but Modi and Shah.
Yeah.
Both of these people are actually dominant, strong people,
Yes.
pushing our country, if I can use that word, in the wrong direction.
Well, in a dangerous and divisive and self-destructive division.
That's even sharper than my language.
Yeah.
Dangerous, divisive,
and self-destructive direction.
Let's come to another aspect of the Modi years. This time I'm talking about the government's intolerance of dissent and of criticism. In your book, you cite several examples of how this government has harassed journalists and academics, how it's hounded opposition politicians by setting the CBI and the Enforcement Directorate behind them. And you write, and I'm quoting you, in the first edition of this book, published in 2007, I characterized India as a 50-50 democracy. Now, we are perhaps closer to a 30-70 democracy. And I said to myself, if this trend continues, we will be heading towards a situation where we're no longer a democracy.
Yeah. In fact, I don't know whether you've noticed, Karan, but you haven't. Just look at the subtitle of the book.
Read it to me. It's India After Gandhi, a history.
The original edition was called A History of the World's Largest Democracy.
You've dropped that.
So, if there's an edition next year, I'll again have a longer title, which will be A History of the World's Most Populous Nation.
But Modi has put us on a trend, and we don't know how far the trend will go.
We can't
But it
boast
could
about
end.
Yeah, we can't boast about our democratic credentials. They were always qualified, which is why I said 50-50.
But now we can't boast about them.
At all. Yeah.
We can't boast about them at all.
At all. I mean, certainly, even if you look at, for example, if you look at elections, now institutions have collapsed. So if there's a government in power, it's not held into account by the legislature, the civil service, the judiciary, the media, etc. But even elections are no longer sacrosanct because you just buy and sell legislators. I mean, look at what happened in Karnataka, look at what happened in Goa, look at what happened in Manipur, look at what happened in Maharashtra, in India's most wealthy state. So I think, and this is you and me sitting here, and of course international organizations have reached a similar conclusion. They call India an electoral autocracy, a partly functioning democracy, all kinds of euphemisms. They talk ambiguous, they talk about democratic backsliding. We were always a flawed democracy, but now we are a seriously malfunctioning democracy.
In this context, how much do you blame the media for allowing this situation to happen? You write, and I'm quoting you, the less than salutary role of the Indian press.
Yes.
Their capitulation has become so complete that there is even a phrase for it, Gandhi media. And you say there are three reasons for this capitulation. There's fear, there's commerce, there's ideology. And the thought occurred to me, is the capitulation today in 2020, 2021, 22 worse than it was of the emergency of the mid-70s? And if the answer is yes, then is the betrayal of the Indian people by the media greater?
So I think, Karan, one major difference between Indira Gandhi and Narendra Modi is that both have displayed signs of authoritarianism. Their personalities were insecure and hence manifested themselves in political terms as the desire to dominate and suppress. But Indira Gandhi was not majoritarian. So even if you had a Gandhi media, it wouldn't be spewing hate against Muslims day in and day out, which is what most of our Hindi TV channels do. So I think that's among the most worrying aspects of our media today, particularly in North India and particularly the Hindi media, is how poisonous its rhetoric is towards its fellow Indians who don't happen to be Hindus.
And this is something our media never was in the 70s, 80s or 90s.
No. I mean, it may praise the Prime Minister, it may be excessively respectful.
Do you blame Modi for this majoritarianism in the media?
No, it's talked. I mean, I think the BJP and the RSS and Modi and Shah and Adityanath have brought out the most base aspects of Hindu character.
You mean it was latent, but they brought it out?
I mean, each of us is a struggle between good and bad. I mean, we all contain multitudes, as Walt Whitman said. But the political and ideological ecosystem today has brought out, as I said, the most base aspects of the Hindu character.
So not only has the Indian media failed to stand up for values and principles that it ought to have been defending, it's actually complicit in the majoritarianism.
Absolutely. Particularly the North Indian Hindi language media.
Let's at this point talk directly about Narendra Modi. You're right, there's a massive personality cult around the Prime Minister. And just 2 or 3 weeks ago, this month itself, at the BJP National Executive, they passed a resolution calling Mr. Modi, and I'm quoting, the supreme and the most popular leader of not only the country, but also of the world. Now, we've had personality cults in India before. They've surrounded politicians like Nehru and Indira Gandhi. They regularly surround cricketers and film stars, but never has anyone been called the supreme and most important leader of the world. Is the personality cult around Modi of another level altogether?
Yes, of course. And of course, people talk about the COVID certificate and the fact that his photograph was on it. But an even more telling and striking manifestation of this personality cult is the naming of the cricket stadium previously named after Sardar Patel after Modi. Now, through that act, once that became the Narendra Modi Stadium, inaugurated by the sitting President of the Republic, no less, with the Home Minister next to him, Narendra Modi joined a select club of leaders who include Hitler, Mussolini, Gaddafi, Saddam Hussein, Kim Il sung, all of whom had sports stadia named after them while they were alive and they were in power. Now, it's extraordinary, this kind of megalomania. I mean, this is the club that the Modi cult wants him to join. Hitler, Mussolini, Gaddafi, Saddam Hussein.
And if I'm not mistaken, the stadium was originally named after Sardar Patel,
Yes.
whom Modi considers an icon.
Yes, but he's no longer. I think he, if you look at his career from the time he was Gujarat Chief Minister, I mean, he has steadily superseded and all the people he admired, and now I think he thinks he's transcendental.
Let me quote from your book about the way BJP MPs regard Modi. Not one of the BJP's 300 odd MPs in the Lok Sabha has the courage or independence to even mildly criticize the Prime Minister in a party meeting. On the other hand, they seek to outdo one another in sycophantic praise of their leader in public. That is something a Nehru would be embarrassed by.
Yeah, I mean, this famous example of Mahavir Tyagi taking him on about China and the land that China.
And his own son-in-law doing it publicly.
And his own son-in-law doing it public. I mean, again, the media has, of course, played along. I mean, it's every major Delhi newspaper, probably 2 or 3 times a month, has signed articles by cabinet ministers with the most unctuous and flowery praise of Narendra Modi. So we are really entering, Saddam and Gaddafi kind of territory here.
Venkaiah Naidu, when he was a minister, actually compared Modi to God.
Yes. So that's it is. I mean, it would be laughable if it was not so contemptible.
But coming to the end of this interview, I'm going to recall that wonderful sentence which you mentioned a moment ago. Modi is perhaps best described as Indira Gandhi on steroids. In your opinion, do you think Modi revels and glories in power? Is it in a sense a sort of elixir of life for him?
Yeah, I think he is. I mean, a psychologist would have to answer that. I think he's a profound narcissist. So I think he's a part ideologue and larger part narcissist, as compared to some other people in his party who are mostly or wholly ideologues, which includes the Home Minister would be an example of that. Narendra Modi, I think the more he's been in power, I mean, the longer he was Chief Minister and the longer he has been Prime Minister, I think that narcissism is that much more important.
Narcissus actually sat by the pond in love with his reflection in the water. Are you saying that Modi is actually obsessed with himself? Obsessed with how he looks, obsessed with what he wears, obsessed with how he talks? Image projection is what he's concerned with.
I think increasingly that's the case.
So he is a narcissist.
He is, yeah. He certainly is a narcissist. There's no question. He's a textbook narcissist.
You end your book by saying, and I'm quoting, India is experiencing its 4th major crisis since independence. For the sake of the audience, I'll point out that the earlier 3 were uniting a divided country, the crisis of the 60s, and the emergency. And you identify 6 elements of this 4th crisis: stigmatization of Muslims, degradation of democratic institutions, the North-South divide, India's location in a fragile and uncertain neighborhood, the fragile economy, and environmental degradation. And the thought occurred to me, is the 4th crisis worse than the earlier 3?
So the 4th and the 6th, the growing North-South divide and the environmental crisis, are not talked about. So let me just say a couple of sentences about each. So the South is less populous, has less representation in the Lok Sabha, but is more progressive when it comes to economic growth, gender equality, communal harmony, innovation, science, education. Now, in 2026, if we unfreeze the distribution of seats, we'll find that the more reactionary, backward, patriarchal, communal, bigoted parts of India will have an even greater say on the collective future of our country. That should worry us. So the North-South crisis is one.
And create a lot of heartburn, to put it mildly, in South India.
Absolutely.
So this is a ticking time bomb.
Very much so. And then the environmental crisis also we don't talk about. And I want to say that regardless of climate change, even if climate change was not occurring, India would be an environmental basket case. one of Narendra Modi's greatest failures as Prime Minister, which people don't talk about, is that in 8.5 years in the job, he has done nothing to address the problem of air pollution in North Indian cities, which it should be a top priority for him to get the chief ministers together, to get the scientists and the economists, and this can easily be solved.
The Char Dham roads and the NTPC plants are making the situation worse in Joshimath.
And you look at our rivers, they're biologically dead. You look at our soils. So, I think the environmental challenge, which undermines our economic growth prospects, and the growing north-south conflict, which not only places a great stress on the union, but means that the more backward, more reactionary, more feudal parts of India have an extraordinarily disproportionate say on our politics. These are two aspects of our current crisis that get less attention than the personality cult, the degradation of institutions, and so on, and the decline of the media. And so I thought I should focus on that.
Absolutely. So come back to my question: is the fourth crisis
Yes.
worse than the earlier three?
You see, it was never really there before. For example, look at Hindi imposition. Nehru and Indira Gandhi, for all their faults, gloried in the linguistic and regional and ethnic diversity of India. They didn't have a monochromatic view of India that the Hindutvawadis have.
The Hindi problem was sorted out in Tamil Nadu in the late 60s.
Absolutely.
It's recurred again.
Of course it has.
Which is why I asked, are we actually facing a fourth crisis which is going to end up being more difficult for us and deeper and more dangerous than the earlier three?
There's an election coming in Karnataka, right? Now, Amit Shah, as Home Minister, inaugurated the campaign in Karnataka last month by saying, do you want Tipu Sultan or do you want the Ram Temple? Well, we want jobs, we want education, we want health, we want innovation. So I think the poisonous politics of North India, its injection into the most progressive and prosperous parts of the country, I think that should deeply worry us.
That's another legacy of Narendra Modi's government. The introduction of the poisonous politics of North India into the most progressive parts of the country, which just happened to be South India.
Absolutely.
This is something that's never happened before. It's now happening.
No.
And this could actually have dangerous consequences for the integrity of our country.
And for our economic growth, for our social stability, for our cultural harmony, for all these things.
This leads me to the conclusion, even if you don't agree, that the fourth crisis looks as if it is the worst crisis we're facing.
Well, it's the one on which least attention has been paid, and I think it's important we change that.
I've come right to the end of this interview, and I want to ask you one more question. This time, it's not about the book, it's not about Narendra Modi, but it is entirely related to the day on which we're recording this interview, the 30th of January, the 75th anniversary of the assassination of Mahatma Gandhi. 2 days ago on Saturday, you wrote a deep and thoughtful essay for the British paper, the Financial Times, on Mahatma Gandhi. And right at the end, you pointed out, you lamented that the father of our nation is increasingly being forgotten by his own people in his own country. But the hope is that there will be people abroad who will cherish his ideals, respect his memory, and live up to it. And these were your words right at the end of that essay. We Indians seem to have rejected Gandhi as we once rejected the Buddha. And then you added, no matter, humans elsewhere will take up and nobly affirm the ideals of those we have so cruelly and carelessly discarded. Cruelly and carelessly discarded is no doubt true, but it's a horrible indictment of us as people and of our country.
I just add a factual emendation to what you said, that 30 years ago, as I mentioned in that article in the Financial Times, it was the distinguished scholar and diplomat Gopal Krishna Gandhi who predicted this to me in a conversation 30 years ago, and now it's sadly coming true. So it's not that we...
But 30 years ago, that prediction would have been unbelievable.
That's
Today, it's undeniable.
Absolutely, well said. It would have been seemed extremely remote 30 years ago, and now it stares us in the face. And it's not that we've forgotten Gandhi, Karan. We have repudiated him.
Which is worse.
Yes, we have rejected him and repudiated him. So it's not, as I say there, it's not revisionism. Maybe we praised him too much, we need to course correct, like with Churchill, the British, looking at his views on imperialism afresh. But it's not revisionism, it's patricide. It's killing the person who did so much to bring our republic into being.
The father of the nation forgotten by his nation, but now kept alive by people who to some extent hardly knew him, or to some extent may even have opposed him. But they value his traditions, his values. We who benefited from them have forgotten.
Absolutely.
Ingratitude of the worst sort. Ram Guha, thank you very much indeed.
Thanks.
Hi, I'm Karan Thapar. Over the last few years, I hope you've been watching my program, The Interview on the Wire. During that period, I've interviewed doctors, politicians, businessmen, scientists, authors, and even the occasional Nobel laureate. For me, it's been exciting. I hope it's been enjoyable for you. But these, as you know, are tough times, and if this program is going to remain bold, independent, and sometimes even defiant, then I think we need your support. At the end of the day, it's a truism, but editorial independence is best defended by the viewers. So if you would like this program to remain the way it is, forthright, outspoken, and interesting, then would you consider supporting us? All you have to do is to click on the description at the bottom. But more than anything else, I hope you will continue to watch The Interview. Your viewership means an awful lot to me.